The painter Joan Miró was a man of few words. Biographers and art historians, let alone the great orators of the surrealist movement, they always struggled to cope with his verbal silence. He often said he honored his surname Miró, which in the Catalan language means looker, a person who observes things. The puppets in the screen were designed by him for the show Mori'l Merma, first performed in 1978, 3 years after Franco's death. Mori'l Merma, which roughly translates as Death to the Boogeyman or Death to the Dictator, is a plot inspired in Alfred Harris' play Au Revoir. Miró produced these costumes in collaboration with La Claca, an experimental theatre troupe from Barcelona. Being a painter myself, I will try to emulate Miró in this talk by looking at the paintings and responding to them in a personal way. However, before I do that, I will read you a few biographical notes about this great artist. Joan Miró was born in Barcelona in the last decade of the 19th century. He saw the light in this apartment house placed in the center of the city in a narrow private street called Passatge del Crèdit. The street is located in the old part of Barcelona and is protected by iron gates at either side. The south gate leads to the very popular Carrer Ferran, with the Catalan Parliament round the corner. The north gate leads to Baixada de Sant Miquel, where a beautiful 16th century palace known as Palau Centelles stands. This curious octagonal pinnacle lodge was used as a shelter by the street's caretaker, a common job in the days of Miro's childhood. Nowadays, a recently opened art shop and gallery devoted to merchandise for the tourists occupies the ground floor of the apartment house, as you can see on the screen. Barcelona today bears almost no resemblance to what it was when little Joan might have been playing with other children in these well-protected surroundings. 126 years have gone by. In the year 1900, Miró was 7 years old. Modernism, better known in English as Art Nouveau, had begun. The movement had also developed under different titles in other European countries. Generally speaking, it was a manifestation of symbolism and la Belle Époque. Cirici Pellicer, an art critic as well as politician and writer, described the movement as suited for the elite minorities of a leisured Proustian society complacent in its decadence. However, he clarified that in more than one of these countries, it was a means of looking at progress via the development of industry and modern ways of production. This was certainly the case with Catalonia, where the movement had an important impact on poetry, music, jewelry, and above all, architecture. Catalonia was industrializing fast, and its leaders were supported by many nationalists in an attempt to strengthen the region's political autonomy. The preceding Romantic period had emerged from nostalgia from the Middle Ages, a time of glorious Catalonia. Modernism was not limited to the well-to-do. It was alive in the workshops of the artisans, where materials such as iron, wood, glass, clay, stucco work and mosaic were used to manufacture objects and surfaces in accordance with Gaudí's belief that the straight line belonged to man while the curved line belonged to God. Modernism bloomed in Barcelona, making the city a true hallmark of modernist architecture in the world. Antoni Gaudí was one of the leading modernist architects active at the time. It is interesting to remember that while Gaudí was building Parc Güell, a most significant example of Gaudí's modernist work, young Miró was learning to draw. The images that follow are examples of the drawings he did as a child, very different from those of Picasso done at the same age. Miró was no child prodigy. on the contrary. He struggled to draw in a naturalistic representational way. Luckily for us, he did not give up, and with the help of innovative teachers such as Francesc Galí or Josep Pascó Marissa, he soon learned to observe and respond to nature in his own personal way. Galí would place objects into the hands of his blindfolded students to make them aware of the form they were going to draw without ever having seen it. In this way, they could then draw it with a greater freedom. Pascó was a professor of the decorative and applied arts who encouraged Miro to respond to pure color and to the vitality of local folk crafts. Both teachers were sympathetic to Miro's lack of talent for academic drawing. Miro's father was a prosperous goldsmith and watchmaker from the Tarragona province, determined to turn his son into a successful businessman. He often ridiculed him when the boy insisted he wanted to be a painter. At the age of 18, while working as a bookkeeper, Joan had a nervous breakdown, followed by typhoid fever. Only then did Mr. Miro accept that it was better a son artist than no son at all. To help in his recovery, he bought a farmhouse in the village of Montroig, near the hometown of Miro's paternal grandparents. There, the young man regained his health and strength, surrounded by the natural environment he had known and enjoyed when he was a child. This rural house would be of great importance for the artist all through his life. I visited Montroig del Camp in 1980, and I was struck by it. It felt as if I was walking inside Miro's paintings. In winter, this magical place is visited by the Mistral, a powerful Mediterranean wind, legend has it, eventually produces madness. In addition, in this fascinating village, we can find 107 examples of these huts known as barracas de pedra seca, shelters built with dry stone using ancient techniques where shepherds would seek refuge from the heat or the cold. It doesn't surprise me at all when Miro said that Montroig was a religion for him. When I was there, the place was still a living example of a rural Mediterranean village where one could forget that there was a busy modern world outside, a place vibrant with nature as far as the eye could see. Palma de Majorca, the capital of the Balearic Islands, was another place that had a powerful effect in Miro's work. His mother was the daughter of a cabinet maker from the island, and it was there where Miro and his family took refuge after fleeing from Paris at the beginning of World War II. Hitler's invasion coincided with the end of the Spanish Civil War, a war that left the country with a fascist government, 500,000 dead, and a tyranny that lasted 39 years. When we think of Miro's geographical origins, therefore, we have to include Montroig and Palma next to the city of Barcelona. The different landscapes, colors, and surroundings were crucial elements for his work. Another important place was, of course, Paris, the French capital, where he lived and worked on and off from 1920 until the German invasion. When Miro arrived to Paris, France, unlike Spain, was still recovering from the nightmare of the Great War. The Dada movement, that had emerged as a violent anti-war outburst, soon became a new art revolution with artists and poets such as Tzara, Aragon, Éluard, or Breton at its head. The ideas of this movement would later be revisited by the surrealists, whose rules were not to accept any idea or image that could give way to a rational, psychological, or cultural explanation. It was an open door to irrationality. Breton, in his first Surrealist manifesto, dating from 1924, defined surrealism as psychic automatism in its pure state, by which one proposes to express, verbally, by means of the written word or in any other manner, the actual functioning of thought, dictated by the thought in the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. These ideas had a great influence on the Catalan artist. The extract that follows is from an unpublished letter written to his friend Enric Cristòfol Ricard, portrayed here by Miró 3 years before his trip to Paris. The portrait, as you can see, has strong references to the Fauvist, although the drawing is particular to Miró. The statement was quoted by his biographer Jacques Dupin, and it states clearly that Miró had no doubt about his need of joining the artistic vanguard in the French capital. He writes, "I don't give a damn about tomorrow. All I care about is today. In other words, I should 1,000 times prefer, I really mean it, to be an utter failure, to fail miserably in Paris, to being a big frog in the stagnant pond of Barcelona." Because of lack of funds, Miró did live miserably when he first arrived to Paris, but he most certainly achieved his goal. He was 26 at the time, and he was bowled over by everything that was happening in the international city of the arts. Years later, talking to Rayard, he described the temporary intellectual paralysis he suffered on his arrival, which did not allow him to draw or paint for quite a while. Paris was for him a powerfully enlightening and crucial experience with which he built the foundations of his mature and most important work. He also explained to Rayard that most of his titles are in French because it was in France, next to the poets, thinkers and visual artists gathered in Paris at that particular time, that he crossed the threshold towards a greater and bigger freedom in his work. He said that French was the written language of his intellect. There are many books written about the work of Joan Miró, covering his entire life. I have used references from Georges Rayard, Jacques Dupin, Alexandre Sirici-Pellicer and Roland Penrose. However, the paintings and sculptures that this man left behind during the 82 years of his working life truly speak for themselves. I would like to show you specially the series he titled Constellations, consisting of 23 gouache on paper measuring 46 by 38 centimeters vertically or horizontally. The first dates from 1940 and was done in Varensville-sur-Mer in Normandy, just after the outbreak of the Second World War, and the last one was done in Montrouge and dates from September 1941. Hopefully, by the time I bring the constellations to you, you will be able to respond to them without any need of further information. After the talk, I will welcome your feedback. To accomplish my aim, I will show you crucial works done from the time he arrived to Paris and stretching over 20 years to the time he started the first of the constellations. However, it is important to mention that 3 years before his trip to Paris, he already had a major exhibition in Barcelona at Dalmau's Gallery. Some of the 64 canvases he exhibited were damaged by the public's violent reaction to the images. What you see in the screen are some of the paintings he exhibited in this controversial one-man show. This image is an interesting calligram done by the surrealist poet Josep Maria Junoy for the cover of Miró's exhibition catalogue. The critics castigated him as an abominable colorist, deforming reality and misunderstanding Fauvism and Cubism. It would be accurate to say that Miró was no orthodox painter, or, as Penrose described him, strangely original. Let's begin with the farm, an oil on canvas measuring under 2 meters square. Miró worked on the farm for a total of 9 months, starting in 1921 in Montrouge, then in Barcelona, and finally in his studio in the Rue des Bloemets in Paris. This canvas was for Miró a true struggle. With it, he was determined to extend further the boundaries of his painting. We see a horizon line dividing the earth from the sky. In the heart of the field, he places a black circle from which a big eucalyptus tree emerges. It is early morning, as the moon is still up in the sky. Everything is carefully ordered. Perspective is not an issue, as things are big or small, depending on the importance that he gives to them. He observed the place microscopically, and he drew at leisure not only what he saw rationally, but anything that he saw inspired by the unconscious. Notice the three ladders, an object that will appear again and again in his work, a device to reach the sky maybe. What is this baby doing, jumping up and down next to this woman? What are these images on the wall of the lower front of the house? They resemble prehistoric paintings. Why are these pots so enormous? What is the meaning of these footprints? Miro had been carefully looking at the work of Pablo Picasso, André Derain, Henri Matisse, and Georges Braque. André Masson, his neighbor and painter friend, had introduced him to the young poets of the day. He read them along with the symbolist poets, whom we know he much admired. Such writings were of great influence to him. According to Rayard, the painter had borrowed from Rimbaud the concept that one must become a visionnaire, and probably he borrowed from Artaud his dramatic passion for the liberation of the spirit. A visionary using the religion of nature found in Montrouge, a gospel free from man-made gods, where the only commandments were dictated by the land, the seasons, the powerful mistral blowing from the clear skies, and the Mediterranean Sea. While painting the farm, he also painted the standing nude, treated in a very similar way to the farm. Her body is drawn like a tilled field. We could travel all over it. Perhaps he was already thinking in the next painting, titled The Ploughed Field, executed soon after. A canvas 66 by 92 centimeters, done also in Montrouge, which is perhaps the first example of Miro's surrealist painting. It has, however, clear references to his artistic heritage, such as Catalan Romanesque painting or even prehistoric painting. Furthermore, this time the painting could have had a political content. That year, that is 1923, dictator Primo de Rivera became Spain's ruler. To repress Catalan separatism, he banned their language and flag. Miro paints the Catalan and French flags at the other side of a pole, where the Spanish flag stands alone, showing perhaps his support to the subjugated region. A double horizon line divides the rectangle. A house is placed in the center of the composition. There must be people inside, indicated by the linear smoke coming out of the chimney. In front of the house, a mare is feeding her little foal, while a vigilant tree with a large eye and ear is on guard. Next to it, a ferocious dog, covered in thorns, with equally large ears, is looking at us defiantly. A group of animals reminiscent of those we have seen earlier in the farm, and including a fish coming out from the earth, are happily gathered at the base of the carob tree. Meanwhile, a bull is followed by a procession of figures, and a humanoid dinosaur is about to cross over some agaves. Another tree-like image with a triangular black head representing a hunter is placed on top of a tilled field, while a bright golden sky could be telling us that it is very hot. Miro's imagination is juxtaposing humanoid, animal and vegetable forms, inviting the viewer to do the same. He is quoted to have said about the making of this painting that he had managed to escape into the absolute of nature, and by doing so he is opening a door to a new way of seeing. From the tilt field, we move to this violent drawing on flocked paper done in Paris with charcoal, chalk and contact crayon. It is dated May the 16th, 1924. The two tree-like shapes are here a male and a female with a child. The horizon line divides the rectangle the same way as we have seen earlier. The female organ seems to be buried in the ground. The newspaper that we have seen on previous paintings folded on the surface of the fields is also present here, as if to say that what happens in the world is left on the surface of the earth. Meanwhile, a window with a giant eye is watching the interior. Miro is sketching a new composition that will be developed further in the painting titled The Carnival of the Harlequin, an oil on canvas 66 by 93 centimeters done in Paris in his studio at 45 Rue de Blomet. It was about this time that his friend and painter André Masson had introduced him to Breton, Éluard and Aragon, the leading figures of the Surrealist movement. Breton published his first Surrealist manifesto November the same year, that is 1924. Miro explained that during this time, due to lack of money, he was not eating much, and therefore he often had hallucinations which inspired the images in this painting. His painter friends would use all sorts of drugs to achieve similar psychic states of mind, but Miro's fasting, imposed by circumstances, had the same effect on him. Although we know that there were no windows in his studio, he paints a window with the Eiffel Tower and a sun insect. Insects had a fascination for him. They often became other things. Here, a giant blue insect is listening to the sound of a minuscule guitar. Another insect emerges from a flame. Two lively cats are playing with a hank of thread, ignoring the lovely fish available on the table. Geometric objects with eyes or ears are grouped next to the ladder that we have seen earlier. A hunter with a female body, represented by a guitar, is looking miserable, while a lizard, coming out from the interior of a dice, seems to be playing with a ball, aiming perhaps at the sound hole of the instrument. The prima materia is represented here in the process of metamorphosis, where objects, animals and humans intermingle. An endless universe created by color and form. Even the globe is present here, via a green circle penetrated by an arrow. Chaos has been ordered. We can enjoy its foolishness while we are protected from its madness. Our next painting was painted the following year in Montrouge and is titled The Birth of the World, a large canvas 2.5 meters by 2 meters. It seems to me that if in the farm he painted an exterior with a detailed microcosm of nature, in the Carnival of the Harlequin he is telling us about the living creatures of an imaginary cosmic infinite. His images exist in an interior that had emerged from dreams and hallucinations. Synthetic objects are alive, insects and creatures, or any form and shape that caught his eye, real or from dreams, are represented here inside a room with a table. The laws of gravity do not seem to exist. There is no hierarchy other than the size in which they are painted. The Birth of the World is to me a synthesis of the farm and the carnival. In the painting, life emerges regardless. We see a black triangle, a red and white circle connected to a bridge-like shape, while dots and lines are floating on a recycled universe. Space created by paint without any intention of portraying a representational interior or exterior, and therefore limitless. Scratches, dirty colors, and massive empty areas portray void, nothingness, any image can be believed here. 3 years later, in 1928, Miro visited the Netherlands. Back in Montrouge, he executed a series he titled Dutch Interiors. Most probably, the obsession with detail of the Dutch 17th century painters was reflected in his process of observation. One of them was inspired by a postcard of the painting by Hendrik Martens Zorc, dating from 1661. From it, he made the series of drawings that we can see on the screen. Although it had been claimed that he was making a statement discrediting the sacredness of the great masters, he explained to Rayard that he had used the Dutch paintings in the same way that he would have used the image of a hare running in the hills. In my view, if we compare this original to Miro's interpretation of it, what we see is a translation of images, a process of borrowing and transforming, no different from the output from his observation of nature. The drawings led to the final painting we see in the screen. It was around this time that Miro was quoted by Penrose as saying that painting had been in decadence since the caveman. Miro is probably fighting against his own limitations. He is fully aware that his comfortable surroundings, the galleries, the art dealers, and all the paraphernalia of the art wall are a huge detour from the instinctive need for the act of mark-making. He is also quoted as saying that he wanted to assassinate painting. He clarified, though, that by this he meant the concept of oil paint, pure pigment, egg tempera, and all the kitchen ingredients of the school of painting. To him, any material was as good as any other. The challenge was how to apply it and what to do with it. We know he used excrement, tar, casein, ripolin, sand, and even blackberry jam. Instead of brushes, he would often use his hands, his feet, or anything that he felt suitable. The same year, he made this delicate piece that he titled Dancer, a hairpin, a small circle made of cork, and a feather. If we look at Miro's face in this photograph, taken in 1954, we can see a profound observation in his expression. The small object, conceived 26 years earlier, seems to become alive here. Miro's gaze is intense and fully engaged with the movements of La Chunga, a unique gypsy flamenco dancer greatly admired at the time. She is sharp, dangerous even, agile and balanced, feminine and round, a true dancer. This painting here, done by Raphael in 1518, is often presented as one of the most sensual and beautiful female portraits ever painted. She is known as La Fornarina, the baker. Through the centuries, it has been interpreted by painters such as J.M.W. Turner or Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres in the 18th century, and by Salvador Dalí or Pablo Picasso in the 20th century. Fornarina was also a source for Miro. He spread color, drawing with it a mass of earthy colors, contrasted by a gentle touch of red and perhaps a symbolic white fish. The earthy image could be read as a volcano. The painting could easily represent the eruption of Mount Etna in Italy. Within the next 3 years, 3 important events took place. He married Pilar Juncosa, they had a daughter, and a new Spanish constitution was drawn. This provided for universal suffrage, as well as a complete separation of church and state. The democratic elections that followed led to the Second Republic. Although he made regular and long visits to Spain, the Miros were settled in the French capital. He was well established, and had exhibitions in Paris, New York, and Chicago. Even though the art market welcomed his work, he was not completely happy with the results. This large oil on canvas, 230 by 165 centimeters, is shouting for change. It seems to me as if he's daring to leave on the surface the first mark that came out from his unconscious, the kind of mark that one would make on a telephone pad, yet here he makes it work somehow. He also made a variety of reliefs, objects and collage from which only a few have survived. These 3 small oils on wood, done at the same time, are part of a series of 12 with the theme of the female morphology. He's trying to break from the beautiful ordered compositions that characterized his work. This collage, using postcards, linear drawing and earthy colors, is an introduction to the series that followed in 1933. 18 large canvases were developed from the collages that you can see in the screen. They were made from cut and paste photomechanical reproductions taken from catalogues and meticulously ordered. The mechanical images became an organic reality. He appears to have extracted a quintessence from the originals, translating it into rhythmic compositions. As Cirici Pellicer pointed out, Miro is no longer using the traditional hexagonal color scheme, that is, red, green, orange, blue, etc. His combinations of red, black, orange, white, yellow, blue, or violet, green belong to the Japanese octagonal scheme. It is probable that he also borrowed from them the use of vertical space common in Japanese and Chinese painting. The shapes and forms are mutations from the inert composition of the collages, emerging from an acute observation of the patterns. This allowed him to remove himself from his poetic and oniric repertoire of images and then return to them with renewed vigor. The images are no longer representational, but they continue to be figurative. Images emerge freely by allowing color and line to lead the way. They determine what will happen next in the surface. We are now 1934. His country is in turmoil. The October Revolution had extended all over the country, leading to the massacre of the Asturian miners carried out by Franco in the north of Spain. The economic recession was heavily felt. Miro paints his serious savage paintings, where a single image occupies the entire rectangle. Volume reappears. Humans become monstrous, as if he is sensing the atrocities that the country would experience 2 years later. In 1935, he paints the farmer's mill, a horrific painting where we can recognize the same interior of the Harlequin's carnival. The window, however, no longer has the Eiffel Tower or the sun insect. The clock shows 12, but the needles have become drops, melting perhaps. The ladder is devoid of living creatures, except for a cloud of black smoke coming out from the farmer's pipe, touching it. The farmer is about to drink some wine, and his wife is lifting a fork with a herring. A creature with an erect penis is imitating the pose of the farmer, while a scared-looking chicken drops her egg. A couple of copulating dogs seem to be frozen, while a horse-like figure with sensitive ears and a hole instead of an eye is entering the room. The sense of massive space portrayed in earlier paintings is here slowly becoming claustrophobic and threatening. In Personage in Front of Nature, monsters are populating a bloody landscape, a premonition perhaps of the battlefields where thousands of Spanish soldiers would be slaughtered during the civil war that followed. It is now 1936. The war is on, and Miro paints man and woman in front of a pile of excrement. This painting is one of a series he made painted on either copper or masonite. Once again, Miro experiments with new materials in his constant search for fresh imagery. It is pitch dark, but the ground is as bright as fire, a fire that surrounds the mount of excrement. He said that thinking about death brought him to create monsters that appealed and repelled him at the same time. Given the state of affairs in the world, the manufacture of painted humanoids not based on life would often transform into mutilations and monstrosities that he did not want on his surfaces. On the strength of that, he felt that he had to draw and paint directly from life again. In 1937, he painted this still life with all shoe. He is using figurative imagery borrowed from his early paintings, and the horizon line is back. The painting was done in France while thousands were massacred back home. In extracts from letters published in the catalogue of his retrospective held in Barcelona in the centenary of his birth, he explained that the symbolic elements he brought to the painting came unconsciously. He said that he realized later that the fork on the apple could easily represent the bayonet of a rifle penetrating the chest of the enemy. The empty gin bottle, wrapped up in paper with a string around it, once again had many readings and none was deliberate. The bottle stands next to its shadow, which is reminiscent of a gun. The piece of bread could represent hunger and is placed next to the old shoe, which inevitably brings us to Van Gogh. He explained that he never diverged from the close observation of the set of objects that he had arranged on the table. He compared his process of observation to that of a wild animal crawling and dragging itself along the ground. To look at nature face to face and to control it on the surface, he said, had an extraordinary magnetism. He explained that he wanted the painting to be able to stand next to a still life by Zurbarán or Velázquez. His choice of earthy colors mixed with the illusion of flames gives the picture the feeling that the world is shrinking around a piece of old bread, an apple, an empty bottle and an old shoe, a portrait of any war. Years later, art critics have referred to this painting as Miro's Guernica. He worked on it for 5 months, knowing that it would be as important as the farm had been 16 years earlier. Fearing for the safety of his family, they remained in Paris, where he combined the making of the still life with visits to the life-drawing classes at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière. Miro returned to the life room, the place where he had struggled as an adolescent trying to draw the model academically. The French Academy welcomed and surrounded him with young students, offering a freshness that he most appreciated. By now, he had a clear language. His handwriting had extended to his images. He could draw without hesitation, responding to what he saw and translating it into the surface in his unique way. Miro is by now 44 years old. He has been working as an artist for more than 25 years. In these drawings, we can clearly see his development. He allows the line to travel along the paper in a constant attempt to respond to what he sees in the most honest and accurate way possible. Men and women are drawn as if they were a one and only human being. The uniqueness of the individual has vanished. Deformations, headless or monstrous creatures share a weird complicity. Dozens of images come out from a single pencil line. Even the most classical pose he turned into a wild form. By then, his vocabulary had acquired a maturity that allowed him to develop further, not only two-dimensionally, but also in 3 dimensions. Soon after the Second World War ended, he extended his media to ceramics and bronzes. He won his own war in the battlefield of his studios. Miro's painted images and sculptures emerge from the same magic as words in true poetry or sounds in great music. Women and birds populated his paintings, objects and ceramics portraying independent beings, powerful images emerging from a visual universe with no restrictions other than having to become alive on the surface or as three-dimensional objects for the viewer to engage with. We are now in 1938, when he painted Une étoile caresse les seins d'une négresse. This canvas could very well be portraying Josephine Baker, the black American dancer that created great sensation in the music halls of Paris at the time. We know that Picasso, Miro, and the troupe of painters resident in the French capital would frequent such theatres and admire its musicals. He had said to Rayard that the paintings he titled Femme, woman, were not feminine creatures, but rather a universe or a fountain of procreation. However, in this oil, something else seems to be happening. He paints a black woman in a black background. Words flow like sensual serpentines, like stars made of sperm. Contrasting red shapes remind us of lips covered in rouge, or anything we care to associate red with. A triangle of yellow, like a streetlight, discreetly shines next to the familiar ladder, ready for anyone to climb up to the vivid Parisian night or to the sky. Unlike Picasso, Miro's women consisted of his wife Pilar and his daughter Dolores, both beautiful women who shared his life. The rest emerged from his images ready to fulfill all his needs and fantasies. He distorted, fractured, or worshipped them at leisure, giving them a life of their own. The same year he also painted the small canvas titled Head of a Woman, where we see a woman screaming. The following year he made a much larger version, which he titled Seated Woman 2. In both paintings we see a powerful image of a woman shouting and screaming. The women's breasts are revealed, painted over their black dresses, symbolic perhaps of Spanish women mourning their dead. From 1940 to 1945, the world experienced Nazism, the extermination of the Jews, and the Hiroshima bomb. Miro is looking up at the stars, searching from answers to the absurd, ointments to heal the horrors of war and human cruelty. As a result, he painted the 23 constellation series and gave each one of them a title that is in itself a poem, a desperate cry for life. The 9 that follow were painted in Varengeville-sur-Mer, and titled and dated as listed. Sunrise, 21st of January, 1940. The Escape Ladder, 31st of January. Figures at night guided by the phosphorescent tracks of snails, 12th of February. Woman in the Beach, 15th of February. Woman with blonde armpit combing her hair by the light of the stars, 5th of March. Morning Star, 16th of March. Wounded Figure, 27th of March. Woman and Birds, 13th of April. Woman in the Night, 27th of April. The 11 that follow were painted in Majorca. Acrobatic Dances, 14th of May. The Nightingale Song at Midnight and Morning Rain, 4th of September. On the 13th, the ladder brushed the firmament, 14th of October. Nocturne, 2nd of November. The Poetess, 31st of December. Awakening in the early morning, 27th of January 1941. Towards the Rainbow, 11th of March. Women encircled by the flight of a bird, 26th of April. Women at the edge of a lake made iridescent by the passage of a swan, 14th of May. The migratory bird, 26th of May. Ciphers and constellations in love with a woman, 12th of June. The remaining three were done in Moonroch. The beautiful bird revealing the unknown to a pair of lovers, 23rd of July. The pink dusk caresses the sex of women and birds, 14th of August. The passage of the divine bird, 12th of September. To conclude, I would like to mention an anecdote that gives a true insight into the personality of this great painter. It was 1980, almost exactly 3 years before he died. I was an undergraduate student in Chelsea College of Art. Miro was the topic I had chosen for my final year dissertation. After several unanswered letters asking for an appointment, I decided to turn up at the metal gate of his large studio in Pальма the day after Christmas. A gardener and several barking dogs welcomed me. With a fair amount of persuasion, I was allowed through the beautiful garden, at the end of which Pilar, his wife, appeared behind a window with iron railings. With my best Catalan, I pleaded with her, and she finally granted me a few minutes just to say hello. I waited in the twilight of a traditionally Mediterranean entrance hall. Miro appeared in the corridor. I saw a man about my height walking slowly and steadily towards me. I was going to meet a genius, one of the very few great painters of the 20th century alive. I could not help myself, and I welcomed him open-armed. The 87-year-old man blushed at my embrace. We talked for over half an hour. Later, in the big passenger liner sailing back to Barcelona, I was able to give a shape to the man in the paintings, the silent and untalented child, the shy and discreet gentleman that, through pure color and line, managed to draw and paint some of the best poetry ever produced.